presentation today is going to be about the Agrotech Lab that we worked on, which is about precision agriculture. So I'll go quickly through the agenda for today. Oh, one more thing though, the rest of the team is also available for the Q&A. So if you have specific questions afterwards regarding the machine learning algorithm or the IoT part that we put in place, don't hesitate to drop it in the Q&A. There's the whole team which is there to help. And our partner Norbert is also on the call. So if you have any questions specifically for Norbert, he's also available for that. So a little bit about the agenda. I'm going to go, as we said, a bit about what is PALO IT and what we do and who I am. I'll talk about the PALO IT Lab, which is where we did this project. And then we'll go into the Agrotech Lab, an overview of what it is. Then I'll talk about our partner, high-level overview of the architecture, and then the part about our experience, where we discuss what is low power edge, what it means to be developing a solution for precision agriculture in a remote area, what kind of protocols we have been using and how to select the protocol that you might need, how to design a learning model, then worked a bit on the resilience on solar panel. What does that mean to function on solar panels? And a few things about network connectivity and access to the cloud. How can you access the cloud if you, well, don't have a 3G or access? A bit about the Agrotech 2, which is the second part of the project, and then the Q&A section. Okay. So what is PALO IT? So PALO IT is a company which is focusing on innovation and transformation. So we we are in different places around the world. We're in Singapore, in Hong Kong, we are in Thailand, in Australia, in France, and in Mexico. And our vision is to harness the power of technology for the greater good. So the goal for us is to use technology to help the community and help the people. And the project that I'm going to describe is actually one of these projects that we're working on. And we are also the only tech company which is B Corp certified in Singapore. And that means that we have acknowledged our commitment to run the business as a force for good. And we are also developing partnership with like-minded organizations like UNDP and farms and so on. So who I am, so my name is Dimitri Baikrich. I'm the PALO IT Singapore CTO. I've got 19 years of IT experience, which means I'm not young anymore, unfortunately. I've been working with large enterprises, FSIs and other big industries. Also for the past 2 years, leading the PALO IT Impact Lab that I'm going to describe in a minute and where this project is actually stemming from. And I have very strong interest in IoT and in innovation in general. So the PALO IT Lab, what it is, it's a project, a group of projects that we have inside the company that are going to last for a short time. So it's a 3 months project usually. It has to be a tech for good project. So we need to be able to give back to the community with that project. The team is rotating, so it's not a team which is fixed inside the lab. It's always a new team which is coming inside the PALO IT project, which is a big difference. PALO IT Lab, sorry, which is a big difference with the usual lab that you have or innovation lab that you have in companies, because it's not a fixed team. We are focusing on innovative tech and new skills and new technologies that we can bring in. We are sharing on the output and the journey. So there are videos that you can find online about that. We have also been sharing with certain community when we're doing open source. And we have to deliver a prototype. So it cannot be something which is just a white paper or document or a blog. We actually have to deliver something that functions. A POC has to be made. So as an example, the first thing that we've been working on for this was a secure cloud OS. So the goal was to provide a secured, simplified OS for the elderly. By changing the way we do login, changing the way we do identification using biometrics and then storing the OS in the cloud and making evolutive, and changing also the UI to make it as easy to use and as safe to use as possible. The second project that we worked on was on self-sovereign identity. So the goal was to bring identity back to the people, to improve privacy and to reduce identity theft. we worked on open source projects, so this has been completely provided as an open source project. We worked with Sovereign, we worked with the Hyperledger in the community. We developed OSMA open source project, which is also available on Android for now. And we've done a lot of talks around privacy and how to use these kind of tools. The one that you're all in for today is actually the Agrotech Lab. So the Agrotech Lab is how can we bring the precision agriculture to developing countries. So the goal for the first part of the lab was to automate the greenhouse, to automate the environmental climate inside the greenhouse, to reduce the human work, because to do that before we came up with the project, you actually had the need of having someone checking the temperature at different moments in the day and then deciding whether or not we need to switch on the fan or open the door, open the plastic covering to let the air out. Improve the yield. So by getting more data, we are able to get temperature and humidity at the right level that is going to improve the yield of what we grow in there, which is vanilla. Reduce the electricity and the water consumption. So same thing, when you are off-grid, you're off-grid for electricity and for water also. So you need to reduce the use as much as possible. And develop improving model. We're using machine learning for that to also propose a way to reduce water consumption and electricity, and then to open source the data. So the challenges that we had was, so this is the solar panels that we are using, and this is our computer room. You see, beautiful. It's not the kind that you usually see. The challenges that we had was, first thing, we are completely off grid, so we have limited internet, we have limited power. We had to simplify the control as much as possible to be able to provide them to the farmers on the ground. Making it highly reliable. We cannot have a system which is failing in the middle and then burning the crops, right? It's not possible, not something that we can do. We needed to be super low cost. So our target for the entire system that we put in place, not counting the pumps and the solar panels, was $1,000 max, and we achieved being around $800 for these devices, and having a low environmental impact as low as possible. So just a word about our partner. The name of the company is Fair Farms. They are producing pepper and vanilla. They are organic certified. They have a very strong view, or they are working very strongly on the social aspect. They are producing around 7 tons of pepper per year. They have 14,000 trees of pepper. Fair trade, and their goal is to take care of the people and take care of the planet. So they're very, very aligned with the values of the company, and so it's a great pleasure to work with them. Now about the technical architecture. So the technical architecture, the high-level diagram would look like something like that. We have put in place 2 greenhouses, so we are getting data from 2 greenhouses. Each greenhouse has 3 sensors where we're getting temperature and humidity. Then we have 1 external sensor, which is not inside the greenhouse, also to get temperature and humidity. We have 1 ground sensor, which is giving us information about whether the plants are properly watered or not. We have 5 smart switches, which are switching on the fan, the dripping system, and the pump for the sprinklers. We have 2 encrypted LoRa gateway that are used to receive information from the sensors. 2 non-encrypted LoRa gateway. Sorry, the encrypted gateway is to activate the smart switches. The non-encrypted one are used to receive data from the sensors. We are compatible with both Azure and AWS. So we started on AWS, we moved on Azure afterwards. We have also a chatbot. We have a very simple to use front end, and we are super low cost. So that's the summary of the project. So in terms of sensors, what do we have? So this is a video inside the greenhouse. We set up humidity and temperature sensors, as there are different places inside the greenhouse. They are low power, which means they have a 3 to 5 years of battery life, which is very, very long battery life. They're waterproof and resilient. We can also change them in case one of them dies and we don't lose anything in terms of data. And they're cost effective. They cost around $60 each sensor. So they were initially made for factories, and we are repurposing them for agriculture. We have 3 sensors deployed by greenhouse. Why? Because the temperature at one end of the greenhouse might be very different from the one that we have at the other end of the greenhouse. So we need to have that information to see if the sprinklers and the fan are working properly. We have one sensor for external condition because they have an impact on how the swamp coolers are actually functioning. So we need to get that information about what's the current temperature and humidity outside to improve, to be able to know what is the time that we need to activate the fan and the pumps to get to the temperature we want. And we are using LoRa technology, which means we have a 3 to 5 kilometer range for these sensors. In terms of automation, so these are beautiful pies. So of course it's still a POC, so it's not the final version. But the benefit of being like that is that we can easily replace them if something goes wrong. We have 4 Raspberry Pi 4. We are running a database cluster. We have 2 Pi to receive and encrypted LoRa signals from the sensors and 2 Pi to do the actual automation. And we are automating the cooling pads, the water pumps, and the fan in front of the cooling pad, the misting system, the dripping system. In terms of the interface, so it's a touchscreen interface. So it's one which is made to run on tablets, on low-end tablets, actually, to not be too expensive. We had simplified interface as much as possible. I'll show it in a minute. And we have clear actionable item alerts, which are coming up into the interface. We've also made it so that if you lose, of course, it's running locally, right? It's not running on the cloud. We've also made it so that if you lose one of the Pi, you can, and even the Pi which is running the master, at least for the system, you wouldn't lose the connection to from the tablet to the web application. So it's resilient on the cluster. So how did we design it? We decided to do very basic draft on how it would look like and then directly start to code and try it out. So we didn't go through a complex or a long period of designing like we did, for example, for the Secure Cloud OS. Here we simply said, okay, this is roughly what we would like to get. We present it, and then we're going to start developing it and see how that works and how that can connect. So this was the original design that we did on the draft. So the design is very simplified. We directly tested it on the ground and we had to do a bunch of changes. So for example, the first thing that we did is we put very nice, very beautiful colors that were not visible the moment that we put them in front of, or that we use them in a very sunny place. And Cambodia is a very sunny place. So getting the information was very difficult and we had to change the colors. We also had to change the size of the icon. We had to make it more responsive so that you could also connect without a tablet, but with your phone, for example. So these are the version that we have now. It's in the test environment, of course. So you get the -62%. This is a bug that needs to be fixed. This is what you get in terms of where are the sensors. You can drag and drop the sensors that you have, and you can see what is the average temperature, average humidity you have inside your greenhouse. The 2 buttons on top are to start, it's a bypass, to bypass the machine learning model and directly start the fan or the sprinklers to get humidity. The charts look like this. So you can see what is the temperature, what is the average humidity, and when we have started the fan or the sprinklers. And you can scroll and have all the data that we left stored on the database. So here are the alerts. So the alerts, we will support multiple languages in there. You will have a button to close them once you've seen the alert and you're happy with, or you've done something about it. And you will also be able later to swipe to remove the alerts that you had. Sorry, I have a small problem. Bear with me for 1 second. Sorry. Voilà. So the alerts are coming up here, and you can either swipe or press the X to remove them. And in terms of configuration, to configure the entire system, you actually have this screen where you select the target temperature that you want, you select the target humidity, and you say what kind of tolerance that you have. So the fuzziness on the model is determined by this. So the more the more tolerance you have, the less power you're going to consume. So it's really for you to decide, depending on what crops you have, how you want to set it up. So here we're going now to go through the experience that we had at the farm. Maybe I can just go quickly around if there's any question now, or should we just wait for the end, Min?
Maybe you can answer the first two questions first that we have right now from Renzi and Scott. So one of the questions is, what are the energy requirements of each devices, which I think is relevant now. So maybe you can
yeah. So there's an explanation afterwards in the stuff. So not counting the biggest consumers are actually the fan and the pumps, and we're going to describe that. But for the a bit later afterwards. But for the Raspberry Pi, each Pi consume around 10 watt, including the so 10 to 15 watt, including the LoRa gateway. We have a router, which is actually a mobile router that we have repurposed, that consumes around 5 watt. So all in all, we are under 100 watts. So we are at like 80 watts roughly to have everything functioning.
Great.
So internet connectivity does not affect operation because it's able to run locally. So you can you function locally, and then we have a way to ship the code, and this will be described afterwards, how we ship the code, how we ship the things from the farm to the cloud and from the cloud to the farm. But if you don't have internet connectivity, which happens most of the time, let's be clear, the system still works, and it's, of course, it's a requirement. Yeah. And for identifying a new project, we basically search what we have a team, and the team is providing ideas for project, and that's how we afterwards select the one that we want to do, depending on the benefit and also the kind of knowledge that we would gain from the from doing that project. So for example, like, I'm not going to go too deep, but the next project that we're going to work on is going to be on waste management. Why? Because then we can use stuff like computer vision to try to identify what people are throwing away, and try to use that sorry, I was reading the next question. This is very bad. We can use that to improve the way people are doing recycling, and how recycling is done in enterprises and so on. So that's our next project.
Okay. Great, Dimitri. Maybe we can stop here for the questions first, and then okay. I think more technical questions that are very, very specific. Maybe we can type out the answers instead, so that it doesn't take up too much time. So
no problem. For your next question on LoRa gateway, let's put it aside for now. This information is we can give it at the Q&A part, because I think that the best person is going to be Shobit or Siming if they are in the code.
Yeah. Okay.
It's going to be easier for them to explain all this part.
Great.
We
Thanks.
Good?
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. So let's continue. So now I would like to talk a bit about the experience that we had working at the farm. So keep in mind, for us, we have been living in big cities for most of the time. So Cambodia was a bit of a discovery, and certainly how to bring technology into this kind of environment. So this is one of our guys, for example, trying to eat a cat on the table. It was big discovery for a lot of us. So the first thing that I want to go to, and which is very, very important, and I'm going to hammer that for a while, is this: technology is going to fail. You are going to have problems with your tech, and there's no reason to believe that your technology is completely infallible. It's not the case. It's going to fail. And it's very important to understand that the technology does support the farm. So you're bringing something to help the farm. You bring something to help the farmer. It's not the farm which is bringing something to your technology. What does that mean? it means that you need to implement bypasses and you need to implement security. So security here is not somebody trying to hack the farm. It's basically security to safeguard the plants, the crops, whatever the farm is actually doing. You need to find ways that if you have a gigantic failure of your system, you can still, the farm can still continue to function. And I'll describe that in a minute. You also need to monitor the solution that you put in place, right? So whatever you're going to have, log as much as possible what's happening. You're not on the farm. You are going to get cases where something weird is happening. You need to understand why it happened that way so that you can fix it in the future. And it happened to us. We've been doing logging thinking that we could have access to the system and see what was happening in real life. It's not the case. We get the logs maybe 1 day, 2 days later. How do you, if the logs are not complete or if it's not very clear what has happened, it's very difficult to retrace exactly what were and how the decisions were made by the system. And last thing, keep in mind that the tech is not as important as the farm production. So it's always the critical part is if your tech fails, you need to be able to continue the farming operation. So for us, an example, vanilla, when you grow vanilla, it takes 3 years before the vanilla actually produce any I was going to say fruits, any flowers. So if you fail, if our tech fail after 2 years, let's say, and for some reason the cooling system is not working and we don't have a workaround, we're going to cook the plants, and the farm has been losing 2 years of production. You see, so it's not good. It's something that you want to avoid as much as possible. So keep in mind that you need to have solutions around because not quoting Murphy, but things are going to go wrong. And for us, we had a lot of things going wrong, and I'll explain that, and I'll explain also the workaround that we put in place. So why is that? So the first reason is testing things in a lab is not really the same as testing it in real life. So everybody in the call is saying, yeah, well, of course, everybody knows that. Yes, but there are things that we didn't take into account initially when we designed the solution. So one of them is there's dust during dry season, a lot of dust, and computers don't like it. So if you have fan, the fan are going to get blocked with the dust, or they're not going to function the way they should. And then they're going to fail. How are you going to fix that from far away? You can't. You need to train the people to actually clean that, or you need to find another solution. So one of the solutions that we are currently building is a box to reduce the amount of dust that we're going to get inside the pipes and inside the system globally. If it's not dry season, it's wet season, right? So water also is going to have an impact on your system, and you need to take that into account. When you're going to have water on your connectors, what does that mean? Is your system going to continue functioning normally? Your code is not perfect and there's going to be issues. How are you going to ship it? If you have an issue in the middle of everything, is there a way to bypass this issue? Is there a way to have a fail-safe? For example, for us, if you have the machine learning which is failing, the system is still going to detect when there's something critical, send an alert, and then take a decision. Taking things for granted. This is more when you are on the ground. So when you deploy your solution on the ground in a certain remote area, thinking that you will have an easy access to power, to a network connection, or even to a shop, not going to happen. So for example, the nearest shop to the farm was around an hour far. This means that an hour to go, an hour to come back. If it happens that you need something very stupid like a simple plug or anything like that, and you didn't think about bringing extra components, you're done for the day. You will have to go back and hopefully you'll get it by tomorrow so that you can do the installation. Time constraint on site was also a big deal for us, understanding that we spent in total a bit more than 2 weeks at the farm. It was not enough to settle all the problems that we have found, because there's always going to be some weird stuff which is happening because of something that we didn't take into account. And there's a lot more reasons why the system can fail, and I'm coming to that in a minute. So when you think about your workflow, when we think about our workflow, we see something very simple, right? So we have sensors. The sensors pass data to a gateway using LoRa. The gateway passes the data to a Raspberry Pi on the edge, which stores it into a database. Then you have a machine learning, a decision engine in machine learning, which is taking over. And then it's passing it back to another Raspberry Pi. And then it goes to another gateway that communicates with the smart switches. And then you're done. It goes to the fan and the pumps. And then it's activating and we're good. So this is not the entire story, of course. So the first thing is you have hardware. Hardware can fail. You need to take that into account. So the sensors, we have 5 sensors in total. We have 1 Raspberry Pi plain, 1 Raspberry Pi encrypted, 5 smart switches, and 5 fan and pumps to command. But then it's not all. You also need to put power on that thing, right? So you're going to have a solar panel, which is going to power part of your equipment. You're also going to have a generator connecting for us. The fan and the pump were too big to run on solar, at least with the solar power that we had on the farm at that moment. So we had a generator for the fan and the pump that is providing not energy to the smart switches, but using the smart switches to send the power to the fan and pumps. We also had a router because we decided not to go for Wi-Fi mesh. We went through a router for the Pi connection and the Pi network. Finally, there's one component that you shouldn't forget, is the sun. The sun is also very important, and if you have clouds or if you have anything like that, you could actually have an impact on the power production, and this can also affect the way that you're going to function. So that's not all, and you need really to think about the entire system. So the entire system, this is not the entire system. This is just a few other components that we didn't think of. So the solar panel is also connected to a battery, right? Because you need to function during the night and you need to take the battery into account. You have also a 3G network connection, which might or might not work to connect to internet and then to connect to your cloud, which is also part of your system. We have a pump. The pump is getting water from a pond and then putting the water into a tank through filters. So filters are not drawn there, but we also had filters in the system. All of that need to function for your system to be live. And then what happened to us in the 2 weeks that were there? And we went 1 week and then we came back, I think a month later for another week. When we look at the things that have failed, we had a problem with the battery, and we had to go and I mean, not when I say we, it's including, of course, our partner, our farmer, but I had to get another battery to replace the one that didn't work. We had a problem with the pump to get the water into the tank, the clean water into the tank. We had a problem with the 3G connection, and when you try to download a little image with 300 megabyte image for your Docker from Docker Hub, and that takes a day to download, you have a problem. We had to find a separate solution, and at the end we found something. We use USB keys, and we use the hotel, which is 1 hour far away, the hotel Wi-Fi to download the image and then come back with a key and drop the image that way. It's not perfect, but it works. We also had problem with the Raspberry Pi that started to get too much dust, and that we actually had to clean and try to make it work. Today, we still have a problem with one of the Pis that simply does not answer anymore, and we will need either to replace or to clean it. So we know in the future that we will need to leave 1 or 2 Pis on the side to replace the one that are not working anymore. We had a problem with the connection between the Raspberry Pi and the gateway. So it was not a hardware connection, it was a software connection. We actually had conflicts on the device access to the gateway. We also had a problem with the connection between the solar panel and the battery. So same thing, we don't know why, but we had to unplug and replug 1 or 2 times before it actually worked properly. Then we had a problem with the generator. So Norbert very nicely said, oh, we'll get another generator. So we also had a problem with the other generator, and we had to get a third generator to make it work. And this took us in total a bit more than 2 days. It's 2 days. If it's 2 days that you've lost, it's 2 days where you cannot gather data, you cannot run the system. You can fix and try to see if, in theory, everything should work and not something else is going to burn. But it's 2 days loss. It's a gigantic loss for us if we're there only for a week. And we also had a problem with the connection from the generator to the fan and pump, and we had to redo that also. So now the question is really about how do you mitigate all that, right? how do you ensure that your system is still going to work when everything goes wrong? This is an example. It's not going to cover everything, but it's basically the way that we thought about how to fix the problem. So the machine learning engine does not work, which could happen for reasons. Could be the data from the sensors is not correct, or it's going a bit haywire, or the database is not accessible, or we have some code issue in the machine learning, or the machine learning decided to do something that we did not expect. So for that, we have a manual override on the software that you've seen. It's this little fan and the little drop that you can press on, which is going to activate the fan and the watering system. Now, if that software doesn't work, for example, the LoRa communication doesn't work, the hub is not accessible or anything, or we have the device conflict that we had where we were trying to program, we're trying to talk to the same device, or we had some problem with one of the smart switch, for example. Then we actually had a manual bypass using a timer. So we had a timer plugged into the system that we could use to do manual bypass. If we have a problem with the manual bypass, because there was some issue on the timer, a fuse dropping, for example, or the timer was not properly set up, or you were requiring too much power at the same time on the timer, and this had an impact on the generator. Solution was, and we actually put it also in place, to put a manual bypass. So on top of the fuse box, you have a lot of switches to activate each of the components manually. So if everything goes wrong in our system, there's a lot of reasons why it could go wrong, once again, we had a way to completely bypass the system and still allow the fan, cooling system, the pumps and so on to function by bypassing basically the entire system and using the switches, the manual switches, to make it work. So when you design your system, when you're ready to implement it, or even after implementation, it's a good practice to actually go through the entire system thinking, think about the entire system that you have, and then think about everything that can go wrong and how you're going to bypass it when that happens. Our system, once again, the one that we describe is not overly complex. There are other components that are not designed here, but for every row in the system, for every connection in the system, the question is really what would happen when that fails, and how are we going to bypass it? We have put redundancy on our pies. For example, we had 4 pies, 2 of them could die. Today, 2 of them have died. So what do we do? You know, how can we continue to function? Is it still possible to function? Also, don't underestimate the weather condition. Weather can also have an impact on your system. And if even a very small component, a plug, a connector, or anything, can completely derail your project. So think about that also when you do your setup, when you design the solutions that you're going to put in place. I'll describe a few other workarounds later in the presentation, which are specific for certain technologies. So on the low power range, first, why we did it was mainly because the available power was limited over there. So we had to really limit our power as much as possible. Just for the story, because the picture is on the screen, you see all the fuse box which is being installed. The smart switches are on the right, so around here, smart switches. This is the extension cord that we had to purchase just before going to the farm. And then this is the first generator that we have been using for the water pumps and for the fan. And when it died, we actually moved to this one, and then we got a third one afterwards. And yeah, here below is one of the batteries. We looked at a bunch of options for our edge solution. So I'm not going to describe all of them. I'm just going to describe 2 that are very similar. So what was the approach for us, and how did we select what we want to use? So this is a Raspberry Pi 4. This is a Dell Edge Gateway. Both of them. So the Raspberry Pi 4 is around 15 watt, 13 to 15 watt of consumption, including the LoRa gateway. It's an ARM CPU. You have 2 gig of RAM. It's running on a 1 terabyte micro SD, so up to 1 terabyte. It's using heat dissipation, and we actually purchased a fan because we burnt one of the Raspberry Pi. So we noticed that it was asking too much and we had to put an extra fan on it. It has an HDMI port. Sorry, just once again. My apologies for that. So yeah, ARM CPU, 2 gig of RAM, 1 terabyte micro SD setup, and then we actually set up the extra fan on it that I just said. HDMI port. This is making it easy for us because we can just connect to it with a screen, and we can see what's happening in the system. And the cost is around $50 for the Raspberry Pi 4. Not counting, of course, the supplementary fan and the LoRa gateway. For the Edge gateway, it's roughly the same power consumption. It's roughly the same CPU, except that it's not an ARM CPU, it's an Intel one. You have 2 gig of RAM. You have a possibility to put a micro SD also. It's only heat dissipation, so it doesn't have a separate fan, and it's not using HDMI, it's using a display port. But the base model for that is around $1,000. So this is a great option if you have enough money to do it. If you have a project where you can actually spend these kind of things. For us, just buying this would be more than the entire system. So this was not an option. So we had to rely on the Raspberry Pi. With also the benefit is that it can die easily. So if it can be replaced easily when it died. So if we have a problem with this one, we can always change it whenever we can. And this was put in how resilient the system is. We can always get a new Pi, put it there, and get the things running. Whereas this one, it's a bit more expensive when something wrong happened. In terms of setup, the way the Pis are set up, so we have 4 Raspberry Pi 4, 4 LoRa gateway, and we are powered with solar panels and a battery. And then we're also going through an inverter. So the battery generates 12 or 24 volts, and we go back to an inverter to generate 220, and then we go from 220 to the 5 volts that are accepted by the Pis. In terms of what's inside the Pi now, in terms of how the cluster is set up, we have 2 Pis that are used to receive information from the sensors, and they are working as HA. And because we are using LoRa, both of them are receiving sensors information, and 2 Pi which I use to send information to the smart switches. So one of them is going to be elected, and then it's going to send the commands to the smart switches to activate the different components. For each of the Pi, we have 1 Docker daemon. We have 1 instance of the database running. So in total, we have a database cluster which is running on all 4 Pis. We have 1 scheduler. We have 1 Node.js and Next.js for the front end. And we have 1 API applet which is used for master election. So if the master dies, basically, the Pis are going to discuss very quickly to decide which one is the next available master. We have 1 remote connection tool. So today we are using TeamViewer for that because it was easy. We would like to move to Salt at one point. And one of our biggest problem was how do you run a database cluster with a 2 gigabit RAM setup? So yeah, so each Pi we have a Docker daemon. I already went through that, right? So regarding the database, how we did select the database that we wanted to use is this. We have been looking at a bunch of databases, but basically if I take 2 of them, the one that we selected, another one, we looked, for example, at SQLite. So SQLite can run on this Pi, but the replication, we had to design our own replication to make it work. So we have built a replication system using a table hash. So each line was basically hashed, and we looked at whether the hash exists or not in the other table. There was a risk of duplication because our algorithm was not perfect, but at least we had the full control on the system. And one of the benefits is we could run on only 2 Pis. But when we noticed that we would be running on anyway 4 Pis or 3 Pis if something was going wrong, this was not a problem for us anymore. So we looked also at CrateDB. So CrateDB, one of the big benefits is that you have replication out of the box. So you can directly activate replication. It also requires at least 3 Pis to function, but 2 of them needs to be up all the time. So you need to have both slave and master functioning, which for us is good because if we don't have 2 Pis running, we either cannot activate the smart switches or we cannot get the information from the sensors. So anyway, it was fitting with what we wanted to do. Also, something that you need to take into account if you want to do, if you want to do a for-profit project, is the licenses. So you need to think about whether the community edition that you're going to use is going to accept the fact that you're going to resell a product afterwards. For us, as it was a non-profit, it doesn't really matter. Most of the licenses cover that. And CrateDB also supports as many nodes as we want in the community edition. And it has also a cloud support, meaning that we can use Crate to directly send a replication of the database to the cloud. Something that we've POC'd, but we had to drop because of the connectivity issue. So our selection was to use CrateDB. I'm not saying that you should use CrateDB in all your project. This is just in our case how we made the selection to select cloud to select Crate. In terms of IoT protocol, same thing. How do you select the IoT protocol that you should use, right? So if you look at IoT protocols today, you have dozens of protocols which are on the market. Some of them are application only, some of them are doing the full stack, but there's a lot of protocols that exist. So for us, we really focus on 4 protocols, which is Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, Zigbee, and LoRa. Why these 4? First thing, we had a lot of experience with Zigbee, Bluetooth, and Wi-Fi. So for us, it was like a good choice to try it out and see what kind of data we could get out of it. And we also discarded a bunch of options. So for example, everything that was requiring coverage, like a cellular connection, we dropped. The things that were requiring a separate license, like Sigfox, we dropped. And also Sigfox didn't have coverage in the place where we were. And all the things that were a very short distance, like RFID, we also dropped, right? So these are the 4 that we have been looking at. So it's not, once again, because we rejected a protocol that you shouldn't use it. There are a lot of reasons to use Sigfox or use cellular. Okay, there's a lot of reason to use Sigfox or use cellular, but for us, it was not an option in the place where we were. So the first one, the Wi-Fi one. On the Wi-Fi connection is a single hub architecture, meaning all the connections need to go to a single router, unless you go for meshing. Meshing for us was difficult with sensors, so the option would be single hub architecture. It is widely available. It's cheap and it's really fairly available because the chip costs almost nothing. Sensors usually have around 1 year of battery life, so it's pretty good. But the range is 100 to 120 meters. So this was good for one greenhouse. Maybe if we're lucky, maybe 2. But for the rest of the farm, if we wanted to do, for example, pepper, it was not an option. The farm is too big. The other option we looked at, the first one actually was Bluetooth. Bluetooth is a point-to-point architecture. So you need to register your device from the Bluetooth sensor to what is going to get the data. The problem with that is what happens if you have a failure of the things which is supposed to receive the data, right? You will need to reconnect the Bluetooth sensor back to the new device which is doing HA, which is a problem. So that for us was already a problem. It's widely available. It's a very cheap implementation. Battery life is also around 1 year, but the range is 40 to 100 meters, so it was not enough for us. So both the architecture and the range was not good for us. The one that was very promising was actually Zigbee, because we've used that in the past, but it was in urban environment where power is not a problem, and we discovered actually a bunch of things. So the first thing is on Zigbee, you have multiple architecture which are possible depending on what type of device you're going to use. It's widely available because it's using the same chip as the Wi-Fi, so it's relatively available everywhere. It's cheap, and the power consumption depends greatly on the architecture and the type of device that you're going to put in. The range is 10 to 20 meters, but once again, it depends heavily on the architecture. So Zigbee devices, a quick word on that. You have two architecture with your Zigbee devices. Either you go for a central hub kind of architecture, or you go for the mesh, meaning that every Zigbee device can reroute the information from another device. And then you have the Zigbee coordinator, which is handling the network and the network route. If you use the Zigbee end device, this is low power. So for sensors, it was actually very good. If you use that, it's very good. It's low power. The problem is that you cannot do a relay, and then the range is a problem because they cannot repeat what the other is actually doing. Whereas if you go for the Zigbee router, which is what we were thinking using at the beginning, which is also what is available in your Philips Hue, for example, each device is actually able to repeat and reroute the message from another device. So in our case, it would mean that every sensor can repeat the data from the previous sensor, and then we don't have a range problem anymore. Problem with that is that we discovered that it's consuming a lot of power. So it was not an option to run it on a battery. We had to find something else. So because of all that, we decided to drop Zigbee and to move to another protocol. The other protocol that we selected is LoRa. Okay, so once again, LoRa, I'm not going to go too deep into LoRa. The reason being that we have this second round of the webinar, which is focusing more on the LoRa technology itself, the different frequencies, the different range, the different channels that you can use. But high-level overview, LoRa is a broadcast architecture, meaning that we can have one sensor broadcasting to as many receivers as we want. So for the HA part is very good, because if one of the pies dies, we can continue to get the information. It's designed for IoT and it's designed for industrial use. So it's also available, and it's also relatively cheap. And it gives us a battery life of roughly 5 years, so 3 to 5 years. When we tested it in urban environment, right? And we noticed that in terms of, sorry? Hello? Okay, so we tested in urban environment, and we've noticed that we have around 1.5 kilometers of range in an urban environment, which means that if we are at the farm, the range is going to be way, way bigger, something like the 3 kilometers, which is advertised. So we decided to go for LoRa. Now I'm going to pause for a minute. If you guys have some questions before I go for the machine learning part, maybe we can do that quickly.
Yep, Dimitri, I think I see one question from Elisa. She asks regarding the greenhouse where you applied the project, how was the technology accepted? Can you give them any advice on this?
Yes. So maybe actually if Norbert is on the call. Norbert cannot react, of course. I don't know if you can.
I'm
on the call.
You're on the call. Wonderful. So Norbert, you can maybe answer that directly, so we have it from the horse's mouth.
So what exactly do you want to know? How we accepted the technology? What we like about it?
Yeah.
Maybe Elisa, can you provide more detail to your question? Let me unmute you, Elisa.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good morning to everyone. Thank you for this occasion. So yeah, my question was really easy. It is considering only the, I think that it was important also the training of an employer, for instance, a local employer, in order to take care of this technology, to apply the technology in the time for the, so after the 2 weeks of your implementation. And so it is only a simple question regarding the social behavior, or I don't know, how to make this training in the best way, and how to support also from a social point of view the local greenhouse in the after the sorry, I'm quite shy.
It's okay. It's okay.
Future. Okay, it is not from a technological point of view. It is from a
Local experience.
So, Elisa, maybe let me try to understand your question. Are you asking about, I guess, the cultural context of it? Do you
Yes,
technology receptive to the users there?
it is the right interpretation.
Okay.
Okay.
Hi everybody. First of all, thanks a lot for having me on this call. I'm really happy and proud, in fact, to be here. So I'm Norbert, and I am the owner of Fair Farms. Just to put back a bit of context, I guess I hold an engineer degree, so I am an embedded trained engineer, so I'm quite familiar with all those technologies, which is, I guess, it makes easier for PALO IT and Fair Farms to work together. In terms of, I think you are right to ask this question to understand how will it work when PALO IT and I are not around, and how are we going to be able to use this technology going forward and to push it to the farmers. There are a few things that we need to take into consideration. Today, the way we are working with PALO IT is to make a solution which is affordable, but also which is a technology that does not require a lot of expertise to be running. That's what Dimitri has been explaining. If there is an issue because of the technology, we can bypass the system easily. For example, now I'm stuck. I'm in Singapore at the moment. I cannot go back to the farm, and as he mentioned, we have a couple of issues with some raspberries. And so what we did is to bypass the system and to use it manually. We will always have the possibility to run it manually in case of issues. Then the second step that we are working towards is the training of a support team locally that will be able to handle the issues should they happen. So there is definitely a need of transfer of knowledge and learning curve that we will have to go through.
Thank you.
Thanks, Norbert. Does that answer your question, Elisa?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Okay, I don't think there are any other questions to address right now. So Dimitri, maybe you can go on with your presentation.
Sure, no problem. So now a bit about the machine learning model which is running on the Pi. So how do you run a machine learning model on the Pi? So when we design the learning model, the first thing is that our model is gathering data from the sensors, right? So we are gathering data from the sensors, and then we are purging the data which is too old. Okay, so we don't run on the entire set what we have to run, simply because there's a constraint in terms of power and in space also. So we're shipping some of it to the cloud, and then we purge after a while the content which is in the database. We've been using linear and logistic regression. We basically take a mean of the sensors data. We separate inside and outside sensors, and then we compute how long we should be running the fan to get to the temperature, the humidity that we're supposed to run. I take the fan, but it's the same thing with the dripping system or with the pumps. And then we have something about how to train the edge device model, and I'll come to that in the next slide. And we also have direct actions which are based on the data that we're gathering, right? One thing that's important to note also is that this is the learning, the machine learning part. We also have a part which is, so as I said, a fail-safe kind of system, but you also have something which is basic rules that are saying what can run at the same time as something else. So for example, we've noticed that if you run, let's say, two big fan or three fans and the pump for the water to activate the sprinklers, the generator dies. So it's not a good thing. So we had to put rules in place that says if you run the fan, you don't run the pump. Okay, so now you have a problem because which one are you going to run first? What's most critical, temperature or humidity? And when are you going to decide to stop one to activate the other? Is it first come, first serve, or do you want to put something else? So we had to think about that. We decided that temperature was the biggest problem than humidity, and we said fan have priority. The sprinklers don't have the priority. So it has to go beyond the model that we are using to decide how long we're going to run. How do we perform machine learning on a Pi? Okay, so first of all, we gather data every 5 minutes. So why every 5 minutes? Because this is a way for us to reduce the power consumption and to increase the battery life. Okay, and also because temperature and humidity don't change every 30 seconds, so there's no point to get too much data. Problem with that is that all the time you get data, you don't know when you're going to get the next one, and you need to resample the data. So we are getting the data from different points, we're resampling it to get an average for that minute. So we say, this is the average that we got because we had that temperature before, we had that temperature after, we recompute the average every 60 seconds. So that we have a single reading from the different timestamp because we're getting data at different times. Then we compare the data set inside and outside to what we had in the past and how long it took to get to the target temperature and target humidity. We've tried doing prediction using deep learning. It didn't work because doing deep learning on shallow data doesn't work. So we needed to have more data to it to function. So we used linear and SGD regression. We also worked and we POC'd how to train the model incrementally. So we tried a few things to continue to train the model with every data that we were receiving. The idea being that you don't need the cloud to retrain the data, you just need the cloud to try different algorithms to see what would be the best way to actually get to the target temperature and humidity. The benefit of doing that is you don't have an actual cost, an extra cost of running the model because everything is run directly on the Raspberry Pi. You are not dependent on the cloud, which is very important if your internet connection is very bad. And you can also avoid unusual artifacts. So if you get a temperature which is completely crazy, you need to be able to read it off before doing the calculation, right? So we're doing tests on that, but basically if you get a temperature which is saying current temperature of 500 degrees or -10, you need to recognize that as an artifact and just read it off without waiting for the cloud to come back saying it was an artifact. And we are able to make better decision in case for example, we have bigger changes in the temperature outside. So we are moving from dry to rainy season. What impact are we going to have on the functioning of the system? We need to determine that, and this would be a good way for us to do it. Can I just pause for 1 second now regarding the unusual artifacts? This is important if you're working in other areas where you have a risk of being hacked, because sensors are usually not something that we protect very well. We usually don't care about protecting the sensors, making it security or safe in terms of preventing hacking. And it's actually a way for hackers or for people that are not well-intentioned to hack the system by hacking the data which is being sent to the system. So, for example, if you are using, imagine that Norbert has enemies, fortunately he doesn't, but imagine that Norbert has enemies and they want to destroy his crop. They could feed the system fake data to ensure that the fan and the watering system are never going to run, for example, or are running all the time. This could be dangerous depending on where you are and which kind of application you're running. So it's very unlikely to happen where Norbert is located. But if you're running in urban environment, or if you decide to run for something that could potentially be dangerous, like flood controls and so on, it's something that you need to keep in mind. You need to find a way to read the weird data or to protect your sensors. So going back to the farm in Cambodia, a bit about what it means to run on solar panels. So when you run on solar panels, you have to take a few things into account. First thing is you have limited power. you have limited power provided by the solar panels, and you have limited power provided by the batteries coming to that. The solar panels works during the day, and you have to run on batteries during the night. Same thing, everybody's going to say, well, it's obvious that solar panels don't work very well during the night. The fact that you need to run on batteries need to mean that you need to think about how the power is going to be diverged to the different system. And the last thing is you have to expect unexpected shutdown. This is going to happen, and you need to know how you're going to handle that. And we had problem in the past with that, so it's very important that we notice it. So what it means to run on limited power. So solar panels rated output is at best 50% from reality, okay? You have to limit the power consumption as much as possible. So the person earlier who was asking about power consumption is perfectly right. It was a big concern. How much power are we going to consume, and how can we shave a few watts here and there? The other thing is you can think about other technologies. So for us, for example, we were thinking about using Wi-Fi mesh between the PIs instead of using a router. So this would shave off 10 watts, maybe 15 watts, something like that. This is already a big deal for us. So if we can get that, it's a benefit. Bring your own power. So this one is more when you are at the farm, but the tendency to plug in the available socket your computer because you need it to do something, or to plug your phone to charge it means that maybe in the middle of the night your system is going to go down, and you have to keep that in mind. So bring your own power. So ensure that your phone is properly charged, your computer is properly charged, and that you're bringing 2 power banks or 3 power banks to be able to continue functioning without using the power that your system is going to rely on. If you think about the battery themselves, so works during the night and batteries works during the day and battery during the night. Batteries is also a component that can fail. For us, we had a failure on the battery. We actually had to replace it. And you have to think that your power needs to be diverted to the battery and your live system. So what does that mean? You have a solar panel which is rated for 100 watts. Okay. Beautiful. So we know that it's going to provide around 50 watts of real power if everything goes right, out of which 25 are going to be used to charge the battery. Another 25 are going to be sent to an alternator. And then from the alternator, we're going to send what is remaining, so around 20 watts to your system. So out of your 100 watts that you have been generating with your that was rated for your solar panel, you're going to get a fifth of that for your system. So it's very important that you get that in mind when you do your computation for power, and same thing for your battery. You need to compute what will be the battery size that you will need to function during the night for your entire system. Okay. So shutdowns are unexpected. So the very first thing that you need to think of is your system needs to be resilient. We said that I don't know how many times, but unexpected shutdowns are to be expected. So even if your system is fine, it might be that somewhere something is not, battery is not, for example, or alternator decided that it was too hot, or that it decided to go on strike for some reason, and your system goes down. What will happen if you are in a in the specific state? So for example, imagine that you have a watering system in place which is connected not to your solar panel but to something else, like a generator, or even something which is just using gravity to do the watering, and you have a tap on it. Does it mean that you're going to flood the region just because your system went down at a wrong time, and then you say, oh, sorry, you know? It means also, because of that, you will need to think about what your hardware is going to look like outside of your hardware, computer, and servers. It's really about do I have valves which are going to be off by default? So it's something that we're looking at, for example, for the watering system, for the irrigation that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. If we have power failure, our valve, our tap should directly go to off by default. And if necessary to switch them on, then we get a human to actually press a button somewhere to switch them on. You need also to think about what will happen when your system restarts. So can you get what is the current state of the fan, or what is the current state of the smart switches, what is the current state of your taps, for example, of your solenoid? If not, you need to reset the status on the pies and ensure that the whole quorum is agreeable, that everything was reset to off, and send the right messages to your devices that everything should be off before you restart. Otherwise, you're going to end up in a state where the system is off, but you really think that it's going to be on. And this is something that we have noticed and that we're going to improve. Gathering state from a smart switch, the smart switch that we purchased initially, they didn't have that function. So we have requested the vendor to add that function to be able to send a LoRa message and receive the current state of the switch. For us, it's an improvement in the system. And what happens if your database is consistent? So if for any reason your routers shuts off, everyone is going to think that they are alone on the system and they're all going to be becoming master, and they're all going to write stuff in their databases, whether they're receiving, you're going to receive twice the same data from the sensors, or the system is going to think that they need to activate stuff even if it was already pre-activated, whatever. How is it going to work the moment power is restored? Does your system being able to get back on its feet, understand what has been done, and then clear up the database and ensure that you don't have any duplicates, for example? And how are you going to re-elect the new master once you have a router which is in there? By default, because everybody will think that they already are master, they're not going to go back to each other and saying, hey, I see you're up now, do you want to become master? That's not how it's working. Once they have the power, they keep it, you know? So, next piece on that is about the network connectivity. So as we did it, I think it works quite well. So is there any questions on the, sorry, coming to that, on the first, on this part?
We did have someone that was asking again about saying that it's still unclear how you overcame internet connectivity and low power supply. Is it the low power edge approach that you just explained? Maybe you can provide a bit more clarification on that. Or Aisha, if you would like to ask your question more specifically, please feel free to.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Thanks for the presentation. It's been super helpful. My question is just, I'm trying to get my head around how you were able to, my understanding from your comments earlier in the presentation is that you don't actually need to be connected to Wi-Fi. You use the cloud and I guess a roundabout way to log in to getting internet connectivity, because what you typically find on farms is that farms don't have very good Wi-Fi or internet connection. So I'm trying to get my head around how you guys were able to overcome that problem still.
I have a description on how it's working a bit later, so I'll come to that. But basically, for internet connection, we are using 3G. We have a 3G card which is plugged in into the router, and when the wind is in the right direction, we get internet connection. So and then the system basically can work in complete isolation, and for us the internet connectivity is a plus. So the moment we get internet access, we dump things on the internet, and we have something in the cloud which is going to sort it out, put it in the right databases, and where we can run models, we can display stuff, we have access to a chatbot and so on. So the internet is definitely not, we have a Wi-Fi router that we set. The Wi-Fi router is part of the entire system that we put in place, and we just have a card on it to access 3G network. Okay, so I'll describe that in a minute. It's actually, the next topic is about, is specifically about bad network connectivity, you see. So it should be exactly that. Any other questions?
Yeah, that helps, thank you.
Okay, great. I think you can go ahead. I don't think we have any more questions.
So we have a bad network connectivity. Question is, how do you bring a solution for that, and how can you still use the cloud even if you have a bad network connectivity? So we want to use the cloud for a few things. First, we want to be able to ship logs and data, and the frequency of the shipping is something that we are able to configure. Initially, we set that as once per day, but we had to change it because it's not basically it was a timer, and after at a certain time we try to ship it, right? Usually during the night. It's a great idea. Problem is maybe at the moment you try to ship it, you don't have internet connection, you know, and then you have to wait another day. So what we did instead is we are trying to ship every 30 minutes, and if we have internet connection, then perfect. If we don't, okay, we try in 30 minutes afterwards. The ship data is reduced. I'll come that in a second. We have an automatic deployment with automated rollback, resilience on fetch and deployment failure. So beautiful sentence. What it means is this: we are creating a Docker container which is pushed into Docker Hub, already compiled on a Pi that it has the same architecture. Then we need to fetch that container when we do an upgrade of the system, right? When that happens, the size of our container, at least the initial size, was around 300 megabytes. It takes a good day, sometimes two, to download 300 megabytes. And maybe in between, you're going to lose internet connection. So what do? You try to download, let's say, the first 100 meg, you lose internet, and then you restart the first 100 meg once you get internet back. So it was not an option. So we had to find a way to ensure that we could download in small pieces, and that at the end we would end up with the entire image that we could deploy on the Pi. And same way, I've been hammering that a bunch of times. But what happens if your deployment fails? If it fails and then you have to reship a new image for it to function, again, you're losing another 3 days. So we had to find a way to say, if it fails, just go back to the previous image and store the previous image somewhere so that you can roll back to the previous image. We once again are reducing the data usage as much as possible by avoiding refetching the same data over and over again, and also by reducing the size of our image. So now our image is way less than 300 meg. I don't have the eye on the size, but it's way less than 300 meg like it used to be at the beginning. We wanted the data to be visible in the cloud and to be able to display different graphs and different data for Norbert to see where we are and how efficient is the system. And we wanted also to have an alerting system through a chatbot. So we created a chatbot which is actually running on WeChat, and that you can use to check the farm current temperature and so on, but also receive alerts if there's any kind of problem in the farm. And the idea also is to be able to run the improvement of the model directly from the cloud. So if the model itself, once again, can run completely locally. So if you don't have internet connection for a month, don't care, still working. But if we are able to run a new model and we discover that there's a better way to do things, then we can reship that. We run that thing, we run that test on the cloud, and we just reship the improved model, if you want, based on the data that we have received and all the simulations that we have been doing. Very close to the concept of digital twin for everybody who's aware of that. Basically, we get all the data that we can, and then we try different combinations, and we try to see what it means to do different things based on the data that we have, and then we reship it at the farm once you have a better option. So what it means, how is it set up? So we did the setup on both AWS and Azure. So I'm going to describe both. On AWS, we have some data that is generated out of our database, and we have the logs, a lot of logs that we generate. We zip them, then we send them to a bucket once we have a connection. And then that bucket afterwards has a notification, goes to a Lambda. The Lambda is going to get the zip file, split the CSV from the time series, from the database, sorry, and the logs, so that we keep the log aside when we have the CSV out of it. And we make the CSV available on Amazon QuickSight so that we can draw graph out of it. We also store the data into a time series DB that can be accessed by the chatbot in case we need to provide information about temperature or humidity. On Azure, well, on Azure, it's exactly the same thing, except that instead of using bucket, we are using blobs, and instead of using Lambda, we're using functions. But the principle is the same, and we're using Power BI, of course, instead of using the Amazon visualization. Already forgot, I'm sorry. And also we are shipping 2 time series DB, and we make it available to the chatbot. So for the chatbot, how does it work? You have a person that is making a request saying, what is the current temperature and humidity at my farm, and is everything all right? Chatbot is checking, is communicating with the farm. The farm provides the temperature and humidity, and we feed it back to the user saying, this is the current temperature and humidity. If we have an issue, you have the same user is also asking the same question, and then the chatbot checks, connects to the farms. Communication does not happen for any reason, no internet or no anything. Goes back to the database. Database says, well, this is the last temperature and humidity I have, but it's quite late. It's quite old. It's coming from 2 hours ago. And we feedback that to the user saying, hey, this is the latest information I have. It's from 2 hours ago, but this is the temperature and humidity that we had at that time. So you get basically 2 information. One, I don't have a connection to the farm anymore. And the second is, this is the temperature and humidity, the best I can provide you. Okay. So any question on this one before I move to the Agritech 2, the part about irrigation? No?
Looks like there are no questions for now. I think you can go ahead, Dimitri. Thank you.
Perfect. So all of this that we described is mainly what we've done for Agritech 1. Now we are going to work on the second part. We have started actually around a month ago to work on the second part of the Agritech, which is focusing on the pepper farm, right? So the part of the farm which is handling pepper. For us, it's a very big deal. I think for Norbert, it's a very big deal also, because the goal is to provide irrigation for the biggest part of the farm, which is the pepper trees. So pepper tree look like this. So you have a video of what they look like. They are very high. That's close to 5 meters. So it's very high, and you have a lot of them. So what it means you have 14,000 plants of pepper that we need to irrigate, that we need to provide water for. We are going to get new data points. Why? Because we need data in the ground. We need new sensors that are going to provide us information about what is the current moisture in the ground for the trees. And because the sensors are very expensive, so a sensor today costs around $200 to get that kind of data, and have lifespan which are very short, because they last usually for a year before you have to change the prongs that go into the ground. We are looking for other options, and the other options that we're looking at is using refraction of the light inside the ground to see what is, or to try to compute what is the level of moisture that we have in the ground next to the pepper. And for that, we need to build new sensors, because there's nothing on the market which is doing it. We also want to retrieve satellite data, and for that we're going to use Microsoft FarmBeats, and I'm going to explain in a minute what it is. And we want to be doing weather forecasting for a very obvious reason. You don't want to water the plants if it's raining, right? So if it's going to rain or if it's raining, we need to have a good idea of what's going to happen to be able to decide if we are going to water the plant, and for how long we're going to water the plant, depending on what is actually forecasted. The other thing that we need to manage is we need to manage around 18 valves to provide water to around 100 impact sprinklers in the farm. And we would like also to use drone to identify block sprinklers. So why block sprinklers? Because each sprinkler actually are a very cheap version of the sprinklers. They cost $5 each to be able to deploy that in other farms in the future. So it's a high possibility that they're going to get blocked, because they're going to be in the middle of the field and quite high. It's not going to be obvious when one of them is not behaving properly, and we need to find a solution for that. Our solution today, the one that we have in mind, but we still need to design it, is to use drone to take pictures of the different sprinklers at different time and compare the pictures and say when one of them is blocked or seems to be blocked, so that we can inform the farmer that there's something wrong and something needs to get fixed. The problem or the things that you might raise is, okay, you put a drone, you need somebody to actually fly it. It has a cost. You need to take that into account. Our current take is actually to use a flight plan using either an SDK directly on the drone, so something like a Parrot SDK, or to use something like Garuda to draw the flight plan and decide when pictures are going to be taken. Problems that we're going to have is how do you do comparison of pictures, which might be slightly different and so on, and so you need a model to do that on a Raspberry Pi. No idea. We need to try it out and we need to see how that's going to work. The other thing is one drone might be used by multiple farms. So if we have a few farms using it, the cost of the drone can be spread across different farms with different flight paths that can be executed at different times. We have other options. So we've been thinking about a bunch of options. Cameras and so on is going to be difficult because the coverage needs to be quite big and the cost might be higher. One of the options that we were thinking about actually last week, if I'm not wrong, is to use sound. So can we, for example, pinpoint an impact sprinklers which is not impacting anything using sound and doing a triangulation with microphones? There's some people that have tried that to try to curb illegal hunting in the US using all mobile phones. Can we reuse the same kind of technology to pinpoint impact sprinklers not working? Don't know. We will need to try it out. So there might be other option. There might be cheaper option, and for that we need to look into. But for the moment, that's the best option we have in mind. How are we going to do that? So we're going to work very closely with Microsoft on FarmBeats integration, and we're also going to be to work very closely with Norbert. What Norbert has mentioned about not being able to go back to Cambodia is a big deal for us, right? Because it means we cannot test, we cannot do anything at the moment. We're also going to work on the theory behind the sensors. Developing new sensors is not. It's also, but it's not only a question of pure tech, it's a question of science. So what kind of light is refracted by what kind of wet or dry earth, no idea. We need to try it out. So we purchased a few things, we're waiting for them to arrive, and we're going to try out on different types of ground and different types of moisture and see what we get. We're also going to discover and document the data exchange with FarmBeats. So the new sensors that we're going to make are not directly FarmBeats integrable. So we will need to design the way we're going to communicate with FarmBeats to send that. And we actually did that 2 weeks ago. So we have an idea of how that's going to work. And we will need to find also a solenoid valve LoRa off by default that are not too expensive, and we need to find that today. The few that we found are actually quite expensive. So if we cannot find a better solution, we might want to go for an expensive Bluetooth valve and then connect them to some Raspberry Pi Zero, for example, that we are also going to use for sensors and use that to activate the valve. So we don't know yet. So this one we're still doing research on that. So a word about FarmBeats. The FarmBeats is a product of Microsoft. It's something which is running on Azure. It's a way to actually gather data from farms and load it into the FarmBeats system. So to be able to visualize where the farm is, where are the sensors, and it can also give you idea of how, or give you instruction of where to put the sensors, and can give you extra information about what is the level of plants that you have and the quality of the soil. Our goal is to pair the soil sensor with FarmBeats, ingest the soil telemetry on Azure Event Hub, and then integrate the drone surveillance directly into FarmBeats. There's going to be more discussion about FarmBeats in the next session, so I'm not going to go too deep into that. Regarding the weather data, it's also a component that we need to focus on. We want to get satellite weather data using an API that is available on the web. We are going to integrate historical and real-time data and forecast data. And currently we're using weatherbit.io and weatherapi.com. It's not that we're trying to resell their services. The reason why we went for these two is we need to get a provider that can provide data for the place where we are. So a lot of providers are giving you 100% coverage, but in reality, they are more specialized in certain area, and they're going to give you, instead of a very precise, detailed information, more like a big, gigantic pixel saying, yeah, the average of this gigantic square area is going to be that much. So we had to select certain API which is providing detailed enough information regarding the weather data. Sorry. We want also to be able to reconcile the data with what we get on the ground. So we are going to add one rain meter, anemometer, and georet to get information about wind and rain. Of course, we already have the information about temperature, so this is extra information we can correlate. Why? Because Norbert told us that the weather forecast and the actual weather that we're getting in the farm is very, very, very different. So it would be interesting for us to see if there's any kind of correlation we can draw between the actual weather that we see in the farm and the one which is either predicted or which is supposed to happen at the moment we get this. Why we're gathering this real-time information also and comparing it with what we have in the farm. This very likely can only happen in the cloud. So it will happen a posteriori after we got the data from the pies back to the cloud. We're going to start comparing the data based on what we have retrieved. This is also giving us a problem because we want to use that data to decide how long we're going to irrigate the field. So now question is, what happens if we have a network connection issue? Do we decide to not water anymore? Do we decide to water anyway? Do we rely on your sensor? What can we do? So this one is a question which is still open. We will need to try to find solution around that, depending on how precise the data that we're getting from the cloud is. If we can get data 1 day or 2 days in advance, then we're good. Otherwise, we need to find some fail-safe, like the one we have inside the greenhouse. And as much as possible, we are going to go for cheaper and more reliable API providers. So how are we going to improve on the machine learning part? So we are going to get extra data sources, which means we're going to get weather data, coordinate precise weather data from the open data sources through an API. We're also going to have in place a time series framework to identify temporal patterns to influence prediction. For example, if the soil is regularly dry by noon, then having 35% humidity at 11 and no rain might be an anomaly. So we will need to find that out. And we would like to expand the machine learning technique using models such as decision tree, random forest, gradient boosting, sorry, and techniques such as ensemble learning using heterogeneous models to make combined prediction. If you have further questions about that, our machine learning guys are on the call, both Ian and Shobit and Siming, so they will be able to answer and give you more information on that. And actually, we are at the end of the presentation, so we are opening for the Q&A now.
Great, thanks so much, Dimitri, for the great presentation. That was a lot of information for everyone, I think. And we have a few questions, but right now, because I think the Q&A function isn't working, so we can find it on the chat box. So now can I ask everyone to kindly switch on your camera so that we can get to know you, we can see you. And then if you have any questions as well, just raise it and put it into the chat box. And then if we need you to speak, or if you would like to speak, you can do so as well. Very nice to meet you and see your faces. So, okay, let me start with the first question from Afifa. So he asked if you recommend greenhouse installation as the best solution for rainfed agriculture with a long dry season and with smallholder farmers running the business. And he also asked if you have any good examples of how the system is being run and adjusted well on smallholder farmers.
Is it a question for me, Dimitri, or is it a question for you?
I think it's more for you, Norbert. If there's any technical part, we can take it over. I think it's more for you.
Greenhouses are quite complicated to manage in those regions. It's really hot, and to manage the humidity, it's a struggle. There are some tools that we can use to manage the humidity. This is what we are doing with PALO IT. I think what's important here in this project is not only the greenhouses part, it's also the sensors that we are going to develop for the pepper productivity, which is going to be a great help for the local population.
Great, thanks Norbert for the answer.
If I may, so this is also important. So Norbert is trying to get other farmers to understand what we are going to develop and to bring these kind of options to other farmers in the vicinity, right?
Exactly.
So it's very important for us to find a solution that can be cheap and easily scalable on that.
Today, so we are based in Southwest Cambodia. We had big issues this year with the climate. Climate change has been hitting us quite hard. The production of this year is going to be very bad. The yield is going to be pretty bad. Some farmers are struggling to make a living, and we need to bring some help if we want those guys to keep on doing what they are doing, which is farming. Otherwise, they are going to switch either to other crops, either they are going to sell their lands, and so we need to find a solution. This is what we are trying to do today with PALO IT, is to build a solution, a technical solution that is cheap, that will be able to help locally. And on our side with Fair Farms, our job is to promote those technologies, support it, install it.
Great. Afifa, does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, but maybe in a separate conversation, I would love to explore more about it.
Sure. Afifa, I think we are now connected on LinkedIn. Yeah. So we will take it aside and talk together next week.
Okay, yeah, sure. Thank you, Norbert.
My pleasure.
Great. So moving on to the next question from Agrotech. They're asking if you can share the cost benefits aspect of these solutions, Dimitri, and what is the scale up potential for a country like Cambodia or elsewhere? I'm guessing in a similar context.
The benefit of the solution, once once we have replaced the two things which are not working and we have the system actually working, is that we are going to reduce the human work and the risk that we have on the system. So, for example, today, if if the person who's dedicated to, and please Norbert, correct me if I'm wrong, but the person who's dedicated to look at the temperature inside the farm is going to the city for any reason and coming back after 3 hours, nobody has been checking the temperature. You have a risk to the crops which are inside the greenhouse, right? So having a system which is going to do that automatically reduce that risk. The other thing is you don't need to have one person or two person looking at the temperature all the time. So it's a reduction of the work that needs to be done. It's not that we want everybody to be not working anymore. It's just that they can be working on more important tasks or tasks which are going to be of higher value, basically. So that's the interest. Cost-wise, the whole installation was done to be very cheap. So the setup itself, as I said earlier, it's this is bad. I'm reading the message which are sent at the same time. I need to focus. So the cost-wise, if you don't take into account the solar panels, batteries, and the pumps and the fan, because this can change for every farm, we talk about something which is between $600 and $800. So the cost-wise is very, very, very low for the system. The fact that you don't need internet to function, if you have it, it's good. If you don't have it, it's the same. And there are no licenses attached to it, make it a solution that can be deployed by a community. So if Norbert is and we are successful working on gathering more people to use that solution, they can do it without paying anything about it, because we don't care about making money with this kind of solutions. We bring something in place that can be scaled by the community itself. These things will be available. Anybody can start to use it. Anybody can start to deploy it. That's the goal.
Okay, great. Agritas, if that doesn't answer your question, feel free to put up any follow-up questions. So moving on to the next question from Lars. How do you bridge the data input to recommendations or actions to be taken in the farm? Understanding what is only part, but have you structured a way to turn the information into good agricultural practices?
No, it's the other way around. So we use data which is already we use the good agricultural practice, so the target temperature, target humidity, which is determined to get the best yield possible for the vanilla, and we use that to feed into the system to determine what is the target that we need to go to. So we don't really have a way at the moment to derive good agricultural practices based on the data. That being said, there's one thing though. When we set up the sensors, we noticed something is that the temperature at the one end of the greenhouse was not the same as the one at the other end of the greenhouse, and we had a big difference of 8 to 10 degrees or something like that, right? And this it's a problem. So the fix was actually not in the system itself. It was derived from the data that we gathered, but the fix was to put black plastic sheets at one side of the greenhouse to get a better average temperature in the entire greenhouse. I'm sorry, Norbert, you're the best person to talk about that, but Norbert, you want so this is data that was, this was a problem and a solution that was derived from the data that we were gathering and that we were able to continue gathering after the stuff. That's Norbert?
True. He is not lying. That's entirely true. We saw a big difference in the temperature, and we indeed installed a quick solution to fix this problem. So the data that has been provided were actionable. We bring actionable fix to improve the environment of the greenhouse.
Great.
I think it's more than that. I think it's more than that, because along the way we are there as well. So we monitor what's happening in the greenhouse. We monitor how it's growing at 3 different points in the greenhouse where we have the data. What is the humidity? What's the temperature, basically? So and we see with our own eyes. You know, either the vanilla is like 30 centimeters or 45 or 60 centimeters. Based on that, and when we crunch the data, we are able to say, well, this is optimized for the growth of my crop.
Great, thanks Norbert, thanks Dimitri. I hope that answered your questions, Lars. I'll be moving on quite fast since we are running a little bit late. So from Ramsey, he's following up on the question that he asked just now about how PALO IT makes decisions to take on projects. Maybe Ramsey, you can provide more clarification on what exactly you mean by your question and what kind of decisions are you talking about in terms of taking on projects?
Yeah, I was just wondering if one has technological extensions of what you are doing in the IT space. Can one interact with PALO IT? How do they take on projects? You know, how does your pipeline work?
Okay, so the lab projects are actually not are a bit separate of everything else that we do, right? So in PALO IT, as I said, it's all around the world, but in Singapore it's 150 people, and we are focusing on a bunch of different stuff for different kind of clients. So we're focusing on innovation, we're focusing on design and strategy for products, on agile transformation. And then on the tech part, we are focusing on security, IoT, mobile. We're focusing on the architecture, improving architecture. We focus on how to bring DevOps in place, how to migrate people to the cloud, and so on and so on. So and how to do. Otherwise, Jayesh is going to hit me. How to do better testing and how to improve your testing strategy, for example. So all of that is part of what we do inside the company, and we do that for a lot of different companies. The lab projects are separate. So for the lab projects, it's project that we talk about internally. So the Agrotech one, I can give you how it worked. We actually were thinking about how can we do a project that would fit in the concept of AI for Earth that Microsoft was starting. And we were thinking, okay, is there something that we could do for other people? So one of our ex-Palawan former work friends decided to start a production of cocoa, so to create a farm a bit like what Norbert did. So the tech guy that decided to create a cocoa farm in the Philippines. And we said, is there a way that we can help farmers that are producing cocoa to improve their yield and to understand when they're going to get disease and so on, and do it at a very cheap cost, a very low cost. And we started to have Michelle is in the call, so she can also take it over. But we had discussion with chocolate buyer and producers that told us, your solution seems very interesting. It's impossible to put in place because we are not there yet. We need to focus on other pieces before we can get that in place. So we were looking at other options that were possible. And one of them, one of our leads has a connection with Norbert, and he said, maybe you want to talk to Norbert. He's got a farm also. He might be interested in what you're trying to do. So I said, okay, fine, let's try that. And we had a discussion with Norbert that says, yeah, what you're going to propose is not what I want. I have an issue today, it's with the greenhouse. How can we fix it together? And then we looked at a solution for that, and that's how we decided to develop the greenhouse part. And then the watering of the pepper actually came out of it also. We said, yeah, what we did is very interesting. We learned a lot. There's still other things that we can do. We see these peppers tree in the farm. What can we do over there? And then we discussed about the irrigation problem that Norbert had. It's very manual today and it's not very efficient. He tried to use drippers, and that didn't work either because the water has a high iron percentage, so you cannot actually use it. It's blocking the drippers. So we needed to find something else, and then we went through this option to use sprinklers and so on. That's how we designed the next project. The one that we do after that, the one about the waste, the waste part. So after the one that we do about the waste management. The waste management one is coming from where? While we were doing the greenhouse automation, we had an intern coming, and that intern had one of his past projects tried to develop a computer vision kind of tool that could recognize different things that we were throwing in the trash. And we said that sounds interesting. We had a discussion with somebody who's actually producing trash, and to see what it means and if it was something interesting. He gave us a bunch of ideas on how to do it and what would be important for him. And we said, okay, that sounds interesting. We want to work on that, and that's how we took on that project. So the selection of the project comes from different places. We have a group of people discussing about that and seeing if it's feasible or not. And then we're having discussion with all of our partners and all our connections that we have in different areas Michel is the best person to talk about that, but in different areas to see how we can, what we can do, and if our idea even makes sense, because it's well possible that we have a wonderful idea that nobody wants to use, and then it's a failure. So that's how we select and we find the different projects and the ideas around it. So can you interact with PALO IT? Definitely. We are available. We even have emails that are working, so you can send us email and LinkedIn access. So you can drop us a message. We can always have a discussion afterwards and see if we can help you with anything. There's always something that we can do together.
Great. Thanks, Dimitri, for your great answer, and thanks, Renzi, for your question. Does that answer?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, I'm just a quickie. So one would be able to access some of the solutions that have been developed, maybe for like what we've seen this morning, for some of the applications that we are focusing on, for example, the Uruguay one.
Yeah, so the goal for us at one point is to make it open source. So we make it available to everybody. The thing is, developing open source is not the same as developing closed source. Closed source is pretty easy. You don't really care too much about what it looks like. The moment it becomes public, we need to have something a bit more cleaner. So we will work on open sourcing the software that we have. Once we have it ready and it's actually working properly and exactly getting where we want to be, then we will open source it and it will be available. That being said, if you want any specific stuff or any discussion on how the system is working, the solutions that we found and so on, feel free to contact us. There's no problem with that. We can always share about that.
Great, thanks, Dimitri. We'll share your contacts with the teams after the webinar. So last question from Claire. I think this is an interesting question that is not so technology related, but she asks if you have found any gender related barriers to the adoption of your technology. If so, how do you manage that?
Question 4. It's a hard one, Dimitri. I know you love to talk. It's a bit early to respond to this question, because so far we've been involved in the team, obviously as part of the process, but we have not been really deploying it to other farms. Today, obviously, I spend most of my time at the farm, so in the end, I will be the one managing, and we don't really struggle with the technology yet. Will it be an issue later? I don't know. Will there be any difference between male and female? I don't know. What I can say is that the level of education is roughly the same between male and female, right? There is no education where we are. So I personally tend to think that the ladies will be more inclined to work toward that direction and to work on the technology with us. They are more curious, more open-minded than the old grumpy farmer focusing on the old-fashioned way of farming. But time will tell.
Right. Thanks for the answer. I guess gender-related barriers.
It's the best I can say for the time being. Sorry.
Sorry,
no
could
worries.
I just add to that? Because I do think it's a very interesting question, and something that we do as well, and I'm sure Dimitri went through this in terms of usability of our features, to make it super easy for you to use it. The audience that this for, how easy and understandable are our front end switches for them to be able to turn something on or to manually do something that has failed through the automated process, right? So to that extent, our current product doesn't actually require that consideration. But just to share a little bit of the research that we have done, because Dimitri mentioned talking to other companies. So we talked to food producing and commodities companies as well. And they brought up interesting points around gender dynamics in the farming industry, and such as who is the head of the household deciding who invests what in your farmland. And sometimes you would see that maybe the wife decides a lot of these things, or maybe the matriarch of the family in the extended generational family
tells you how much you need to save for your kids' education versus how much you can spend on fertilizers. And then if you want to invest in drones, like, okay, you know, maybe it's a discussion you need to have with the whole household and not just the farmer and the farm itself. So, I mean, not specific stuff that we actually had to apply at this stage, but definitely something that we would really encourage you guys to think about from a human-centered design principle, going through that process of empathizing, of connecting with your users. Might be a little hard now that we're all remote, but you know, if you can get access to them, definitely try to ask questions around like who else needs to be involved here, and be sensitive obviously to the cultural and gender dynamics around these topics. And trust your instincts, I guess, to pick up on the cues as to whether there's more than meets the eye in terms of who's the decision maker, and what could appeal to them to actually adopt it or buy your solution. So just wanted to share that we did have these insights in initial conversations.
Great, Michelle. I think those are some really helpful tips. Thanks so much for sharing. I think that's all the questions that we have. So if anyone else has any follow-up questions for PALO IT, you can just send them to me and I will send them to PALO IT for them to answer. And we will also send a few key takeaway points that we've had from the webinar as well as the recorded webinar. So now I will hand over to Armand for him to address some of the next steps and what will be happening for this program. But thanks so much, Dimitri, for the great presentation.
It's my pleasure. I'm really glad if it was of any help with anybody. Just one more thing, if you want to add me on LinkedIn, can you just specify that we met in the webinar, because I receive a lot of invite and I usually reject most of them. So if you want to connect, just put I was in the webinar or something like that, so I can add you. Thank you.
Dimitri is very popular. Yeah. So thanks so much again for the great presentation. Very technical and very helpful to everyone, I think, especially for those doing precision agriculture. So now over to Armand.
Thank you, Mina. Thank you for the exceptional moderation of this pretty difficult session, because we have around 60 people participating on that webinar, which is really impressive. And of course, thanks to PALO IT team for organizing this webinar on a very, very prompt response in a very quick time. And I think in terms of the content, it was very, very useful, in particular considering that large number of applicants are doing precision agriculture and digital farming. So thank you. That was really exceptional webinar. And we're looking forward to have another one jointly. So colleagues, I'd just like to, I know that we'll have a chance to meet you all again sometimes next week, but just to provide you some more information about what we're planning to do in the near future, is that of course we are working with our partners at tech companies, but also in private sector organizations that are engaged in agriculture and food. And so I hope that in May and beginning of June, we will have several other sessions focused on different aspects. Of course, we'll have one with the PALO IT and Microsoft jointly, but there would be another separate conducted by another team at Microsoft that will be more focused on the machine learning and AI. Then we have already confirmed 2 or 3 sessions with Accenture Consulting, and it will be more focused on the marketing, on the finance, something like the investments and the pricing of some services that you provide to give you a good idea on that. And obviously Accenture is one of the largest consulting firms in the world, and they have a very good understanding of that particular field. They would also help you to think about the best business models for commercialization and scale up for those of you that have that need. Other than that, they would have also a good overview of the agriculture and food sector in general. Then we will have also some partners from venture capital firms, such as AgFunder, 500 Startups, and Big Ideas Venture. And those guys will be speaking to you in terms of, again, something on the practical side of the commercialization and penetration of some new markets. And of course, we have started to set up meetings with the country offices So every team will have an opportunity to talk to the UNDP country office, and then we would start kind of organizing more virtual meetings with the government representatives, with other international organizations in those countries that you've applied for, because we thought that it will be very useful to connect you with some people, to maybe collect some more information, to build networking before the country visits, because we're really keen to organize these country visits as soon as possible. But of course, that depends on the how situation with COVID-19 evolving. So we're watching closely. So as soon as situation gets better, we'll start organizing these country visits. But in the meantime, we'll be try to use this virtual opportunity for networking with the country offices and all necessary and important stakeholders in the countries. And I think today's session was also a very important one from the perspective that, you know, usually people thinking about technologies and looking at the technologies in isolation. I think what Dimitri has demonstrated is a good convergence of different technologies, such as automation and digital technologies, which in our opinion is important to consider when you would like to have the multiplier effect on the ground. So that's all on my side, because I don't want to consume your time, since we'll have a chance to speak with you, and you can of course address your questions, but I think it's not the best platform today. So a generic overview before we meet you all next week. Thank you everyone for these exceptional presentations and webinars, and thanks to all startups and R&Ds for participating on this webinar, because again, the number is very impressive. I hope we'll have you all on the next sessions as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Armand. That was a great roundup